Hello, and welcome to an all-new episode of the Transfix Take podcast, where we are performance-driven. It's the week of February 15th, and we're bringing you news, insights, and trends from our market expert, Justin Mays. Now, Mays, I have to say, although it's past, happy Valentine's Day.
Hey, Jenny, great to see you again, and happy Valentine's Day to you as well.
Thank you, Mays. Now, my favorite thing about Valentine's Day is not the flowers, but rather the logistics of flowers.
That's right, Jenny. A lot of people don't realize that Valentine's Day does play to a seasonality impact for the freight transportation sector. In fact, Valentine's Day usually contributes to tighter markets in southern Florida, and this is due to the imports of flowers from South America, especially Colombia. It heats up the truckload market just as Valentine's Day heats up romance for everyone else.
Love that analogy. So you know I'm going to ask you, what else did Valentine's Day heat up, Mays?
Well, Jenny, Valentine's Day did heat up capacity in the Southeast, especially Florida, driving rates a little bit higher by a slim margin. But nationally, the market has remained static when it comes to spot rates. More of a reason why I believe we are potentially seeing a bottom of spot rates in the coming next 6 to 8 weeks, like I mentioned last week. The only regions I really think that continue to have a good amount of room to decline is going to be the Midwest and Northeast as they move out of their tight seasons.
And with weather neutralization, like we're starting to see in the Northeast with that 50, 60 degree weather mark, we'll start to see more normalcy. But where are we in terms of rejections?
Looking at rejections, I only second this opinion, as we are starting to see a floor hit with tender rejections for contract freight. We saw a slight incline in the past week, in fact, and we are starting to see this more of a static trend to the right rather than a continued decline that we've seen since the beginning of the year.
So here's the name of the game. More tender rejections typically lead to tighter capacity in the market, which means that carriers are playing a game where they could potentially gain control again of the spot market. But we've still got a ways to go in order to see that swing.
That is true, Jenny. There still is a large spread between contract and spot rates, although contract rates are continuing to slowly decline. The only issue there is that this gap is really brought on by contract freight that sits with brokers and large asset companies. The spread isn't necessarily where market rates can continue to drop for small and mid-sized carriers. These carriers are already in that position. It's going to be interesting in the coming months as all of these new RFPs that are being priced and starting to go live with these large shippers go into place and really start squeezing the margin potential that brokers and these large asset companies have, and how long it takes for that tender rejection on top contract freight to start ticking upward, leaking more spot freight into the spot market.
I think we'll see it at the end of Q2, but where do you stand on this issue, Mays?
Though I do think it's safe to say with tender rejections below 3.5% still, we have some time before anything dramatic happens in the market. On top of that, we are looking at some large winter storms moving in this week that could play a hand in shifting some capacity and tightening capacity in the Southwest, particularly in Arizona and New Mexico, as they are anticipating some pretty significant snowfall for this time of year. And Colorado and Utah are still battling some snowstorms as well. These big storms are rolling across the Southwest up through the Midwest. But to be honest, Jenny, like I've said many times, I think we are in a place with loose enough capacity that we can absorb these somewhat significant storms. I do not believe we're going to see anything that plays out similar to what we saw in the last few weeks when the South, Texas, and Arkansas, and even parts of Louisiana saw an extremely deep freeze, closing down facilities for several days.
Yeah, we're looking at about 5 inches of snow for the Dakotas into northern Minnesota, and then probably about 6 inches at best for the Colorado, New Mexico area, but we'll keep an eye on it. But that said, Mays, you know what it's time for.
Let's do it, Jenny. The Valentine's Week regional breakdown. The Northeast, I do believe we're going to continue to see spot rates decline at a faster rate than most other regions. That is, unless there is a winter storm brewing its way that we do not know about. But to be honest, Jenny, the weather up in the Northeast is supposed to be quite warm for this time of the year. I believe that freight going down to the Southeast and to the West Coast will continue to see tighter capacity with stagnant or slightly rising rates, but freight leaving the Northeast going to the Midwest, coastal, and the South will continue to see decreases.
Great. Now, what about the Midwest that I know has somewhat of the similar seasonality trends as you just described?
I also believe we are going to continue to see rates fall unless it's going to the West Coast. Freight staying within the Midwest will likely see the largest decreases week over week. And for most of the Midwest, As we start to leave winter, even though there is some snow coming this week, as we start to see the end of winter, we will likely see more loosening in the coming weeks, greater than other regions such as the West Coast and Southeast.
Now let's jump on down to the Southeast coastal region.
The coastal region in particular has been stubborn lately, especially in the North Carolina markets. We haven't really seen any relief in price, and to be honest, this week we're going to probably see flat week-over-week changes. Freight going even farther down south to destinations like Florida are going to continue to be tough as capacity pushes away from trying to go down to Florida as it also loosens up.
Okay, so as we speak about Florida, why don't we move down to the Southeast, Maze?
Last week, and to be honest, for the last 3 weeks, we've been calling out tighter capacity in the Southeast, especially Florida, again, thanks to the wonderful Valentine's Day holiday. I do believe that Florida is going to start seeing some loosening, although it's not going to take place until later this week. For Atlanta, which is one of the largest freight markets by volume, we've continued to see tighter capacity last week, more than I actually would have anticipated. I do believe this week, brokers and carriers will be able to continue to hold rates stagnant in the spot market. Additionally, the Memphis market has continued to be tight, primarily due to the weather events that have happened over the last 3 weeks. And this week, unfortunately, is not looking any different. With major thunderstorms approaching the Memphis, Tennessee market, I believe that we are actually going to continue to see rates slightly increase through the week.
Lots of weather to watch around the continental United States that we'll keep an eye on. Now, Mace, let's go over to the West Coast.
Freight leaving the West Coast is going to continue to see rates decrease. The only destination for freight originating in the West Coast to see rates increase is if it's picking up in the Pacific Northwest, going back down to one of the major shipping meccas in California. Other than that, freight is going to continue to be stagnant for inter-West Coast movements.
Okay, Maze, and last but not least, what's going on with the South?
The South has been a region to keep an eye on for the last several weeks due to all the storms, from winter storms to severe thunderstorms. I believe in the major freight markets in the South, we're going to continue to see loosening. That's out of Dallas and Houston. So it is likely that we're going to start seeing some capacity issues, although I do not believe they're going to be too significant.
So obviously, shippers be on the lookout for carriers that are running late or may have delays, obviously due to inclement weather. We are always advising their safety first. But Maze, any final thoughts before we move on?
Jenny, as we reach the midway point in February, I think there's two core things that we need to continue to monitor and keep an eye on, as they are leading indicators of what is to come in the next few weeks to few months. And that is inventory and imports, and what's happening, as they are so much interconnected.
And based on the numbers from Q1 and projections for Q2 and even Q3, it really doesn't look like we're going to see a significant jump in those imports based on consumer consumption.
I'm sure a lot of shippers are monitoring their inventory levels very closely, because the cost to store inventory in warehouses has only increased and is expected to increase faster than the rate of inflation. So this means that shippers do not want to have extra inventory on hand and pay a premium to house it. So will shippers wait to the last second and all rush to order freight for imports? Or will it be better planned out, leading to less congestion? It's all in that crystal ball that we need to start shaking up in the coming weeks.
I think you might be spot on with that back to school suggestion, but of course, time will tell. With that, we'll see you next week with an all new episode of the Transfix Take podcast. Until then, drive safely. All views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of Transfix Inc. or any parent companies or affiliates or the companies with which the participants are affiliated, and may have been previously disseminated by them. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are based upon information considered reliable, but neither Transfix Inc. nor its affiliates nor the companies with which the participants are affiliated warrant its completeness or accuracy, and it should not be relied upon as such. All views and opinions are subject to change.